Anna, it's a pleasure to see you and talk to you, and most importantly, to have this opportunity to work together. And there's so much that needs to be done. So let me just give you a warm welcome and a thank you for giving me the opportunity to basically have the chance to contribute what we have in the Lighthouse Law Club to your fantastic efforts in the state assemblies. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Mark. You know, it's been a long time coming, and when I heard your call for unity and working together in your recent video, I immediately perked up my ears and thought, yes, he's absolutely right. And I really appreciated your summation of the problem that we face, which is basically that, as you said, we haven't had the education, we haven't had the organization, and we haven't had the funding to do what needed to be done. And that's what the Patriot movement in America has struggled against for 100 years.
Yeah. So it's time for us to change all that. And as far as you and I are concerned anyway, this is our first step in doing that. So let's dig into it. What I'd like to do is first just highlight the problem. I think most anybody watching this video knows the problems that we face, but let's summarize it so we can identify what needs to be tackled. And I'm an old football player, so I use a lot of football euphemisms, okay? So bear with me. All right, so we need to tackle those problems specifically, and we'll get down to specifics as to how you and I both propose that we do that, okay? So I think it goes without saying that the whole globe is on the precipice of falling into the abyss of total tyranny. The globalists, the demonic forces of this world are throwing everything they have at us to put us all on our knees. And at this point, the way I see it, if we don't get active and get engaged, and that means everybody get off the couch and start fighting for freedom, that we're going to lose it. And we'll either have the choice to be chipped and go to a FEMA camp and then be re-educated, or die out in the wilderness, whatever the case may be. I mean, that sounds extreme, but if those of you who know what the game plan is, you understand that's the truth. And so we have to act now. And this presentation, this discussion is entirely focused on taking the steps to do that. So anything you'd like to add to that, Anna?
Well, I guess I don't see it as quite so desperate as perhaps you do at this point, or a lot of other people, because although I'm aware of the imminent danger of corporate feudalism, which is what I call it, I also know that we ultimately have the power in our hands to put an end to it, and that we have both the legal and the lawful right to do so, and that actually we have power that we aren't exercising at this point, which is deadly to the corporate model. We have the means to fight them without firing a shot. And so I'm hopeful that with more people participating and understanding the power and the strength that we have, we will be able to bring an end to the attempts of the corporations to impose this new form of feudalism on people.
Right, exactly. Well, I'm glad you have a calmer temper than I do, because that can be quite valuable. Okay, so today we want to address the issue of really mass ignorance that society in general has been a victim of and is suffering from, and what we can do to help change that by way of education, all right, through what you and I are both actively involved in, and many others. This is something that we invite all other groups and organizations to participate in, to join in with us. We need to come together. Okay, so we need to deal with the educational aspect of that. We need to be able to draw a line in the sand as far as the corporate agents are concerned, so that they know that there are consequences if they step over that line of lawful authority. We can address that. And we need to address the fact that people need to come together, all right, and have the tools, have the education, and most importantly, or equally as important, to have the support structure to back them up. And that's one thing I think that's sadly been missing. Okay, so let's deal with the solutions. Tell us a little bit about the educational aspect of the state assembly project and what you're doing there.
Well, this all began when we realized that the people's government had been vacated. And this essentially happened in the aftermath of the Civil War. The Civil War, we discovered, was never declared, and it was never settled with a peace treaty. We also discovered that the Reconstruction Acts remain, for the most part, in full force and effect. So what we're presented with is a 150-year boondoggle that was created mostly by our federal employees. And the end result of that is what we're facing right now. However, we have always had the power, and it has always been in our grasp to put an end to the situation and to take charge of it and reconstruct the government and to operate our country on a basis that leaves the control in the hands of the actual people. We're supposed to be a self-governing nation. We're supposed to have control of our assets. We're supposed to be calling the shots. But instead, we've been out to lunch for 150 years. And, you know, it seems rather ridiculous when I say that, but that is, in fact, what our research and the public records show. And everything that we have done has been unopposed, which is another indication that we're correct. Because if we were not correct, the federales would be in here arresting us by the busloads and taking us some experience and the experience of many people that we have worked with in the past. The federales are not shy about imposing upon Americans who are actually doing nothing but attempting to self-govern. And if we didn't have this right, if we didn't know the story, if we didn't have the facts, they'd be in here and causing us trouble too. The fact that they're not indicates that we are on the right track.
Okay, excellent. So how we got here is one thing, and then it's a matter of getting from here to there in terms of education and, for example, legal status, self-government. You know, those subjects can raise a lot of questions and issues. All right. So what are the state assemblies doing in terms of educating people along those lines?
Well, first and foremost, we're bringing their attention to the fact that we're in a war zone because the Civil War was never ended. Our federal employees kept it going. The municipal federal civil servants were on the side of the South, and the U.S. Army was on the side of the North in that particular conflict. And so they have kept this kind of bogus war going between the two sides of the federal employees. And we're in the middle of it. We're third parties. We were never involved in all of that to begin with. If you look at the muster books for the Civil War, you see that they were all soldiers that were mustered out by commercial companies, by the states of states. So we are third parties. The people that are members of a state assembly are the original Americans, and the states are the ones that get to create or hire or otherwise administer state-of-state organizations. We're the only ones that can, and that's part of the problem. The federal employees couldn't have recreated our states of states even if they had wanted to. We're the only ones who can do this particular job. And we can only do that job when we declare our proper political status as Americans and not as federal citizens.
So that's the first step, really, is declaring the proper legal status to get out of that corporate status of being a U.S. citizen and then becoming, what, a state citizen? Is that the term you would use?
There are two options. You can be a state national or a state citizen. A state citizen takes up the obligation to self-govern and run their state of the union. A state national status is allowable and is desirable in some cases. Normally, a state national status indicates some degree of incapacity. For example, children up to the age of 21 are state nationals by definition because they're too young to join the state assembly. People who are over the age of 45 who have already served their time in the state assembly can opt out and decide to adopt state national status because they're of an age when they are not expected to participate. People who are working for the federal government, who are born in America, are in a quasi-dual status that prevents them from acting as a state citizen, but they're still an American and they're still owed all of their guarantees. So they opt for a state national status. And there are other examples, people with health problems, people with 10 kids still at home, where you just cannot participate in a state government.
So state citizen or state national. All right. So I know a lot of people are very busy chasing that elusive rainbow of changing legal status, and they're getting all wrapped up in paperwork and processes, authenticating birth certificates, getting State Department documents, getting involved in UCC forms, having problems filing because some places don't want to file or record these documents. What have you done in that regard?
Well, we started out going down the rabbit hole and figuring out all of the different things that had been alleged about us that we needed to correct. And we developed what we call the 928 process, which fills all those holes. It's very long, it's complex, it's a lot of money, and it's a lot of time. But the Holy Grail was always finding a way to bring the people back onto the land and give them basic protection without going through all of that, and then allowing them to look at it in a more studied way and figure out what they individually need out of the 928 process. So we finally arrived there a few months ago when we discovered how the original founding fathers dealt with the same problem. And what we came up with was a one-page, what we call 1779 declaration, because the founders adopted this in 1779 as a means to solve the problem that they faced, and which we still face today, of having many people from many nations, all of whom need to make decisions about their political status. So we have a one-page declaration. We have a two-page witness statement where you bring forward two witnesses who can identify you as having been born in this country or having been properly naturalized, legally naturalized to this country, or born to American parents abroad, which are the three basic categories. And then you can just fill out this one-page declaration, which is very simple. You can present your two witnesses, confirming who your identity, and then you bring forward whatever paperwork you have, whether your naturalization paperwork or your birth certificate from a foreign state that shows that you were born in this country, And really, when we look at birth certificates, that's all we're looking for is confirmation that you were born in one of the states.
Okay. So you've simplified it quite a bit. That's beautiful. Yeah. Now, you've also developed a system for recording documents. Let's talk about that.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's one of the more exciting developments. Now that we have our state assemblies up and rolling, we have the capability of issuing state credentials to act as travel passes and IDs that are very easy to recognize, easy for, say, state patrolmen or others that are out around doing law enforcement activities to identify exactly who you are and what your political status is. And that just makes it all that much easier for everybody. So we have that capability coming online around the 1st of July.
And that will be a universal type of document between the various state assemblies, or will each state assembly kind of have their own design?
Everybody will have their own design. Under international law, you're required to give your name and your address, your physical address on AD. And we go quite a bit beyond that, in that we provide some basic information and identification for people who wish to travel interstate or even international. The information that we provide is substantial enough so that it should function like a travel card that we've had between Mexico, Canada, and the US, where you have just this little credit card sized ID that allows you to pass over some international borders like a passport. So that should be online here very first week of July, and each assembly will have their own.
Okay. I've always been concerned about identifying myself with a physical address, thus lending to the notion that I could be perceived as a resident of the state of. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we resolved that by making it an in care of address for now. But very shortly, we're going to, the giant trust that they created is going to collapse here in the next few weeks. And at that point, everything returns back to the people and to the actual government of this country, so that we will no longer be dealing with a state of state situation. We'll be dealing directly with our states. And so all of those descriptions, those property descriptions that they've layered on top of us, will actually accrue to us. And it will no longer be a state of state address. It will be a state address.
There's a location identifier, and I forget the name of it, darn it, but really it presents you with a code that identifies your latitude and longitude.
Yeah, the NAC system, which is part of the postal system grid, if you will.
Yeah, have you ever thought about using that instead? I mean, that would be one way to present it, which few people would actually even understand, but you've presented it.
Well, the thing is you get to choose how you're going to describe your locus, and we've described our locus in terms of the state. So we would prefer to just subsume all of those different descriptions as property belonging to the people of that state.
Yeah.
And, not recreate the wheel and not have to go through what they've gone through with every change of administration, practically, going around and renaming streets and adding new layers of categories. Every piece of property in America has a plat number. It has a subdivision, it has a street number, it has a land description according to a borough or a city. We've just got all these layers upon layers of descriptions that have been applied to our property by third parties and then used as a means of establishing false claims against our property assets.
So no sense in creating the wheel. Just work with that. Simply claim it as this is our territory, our jurisdiction.
It all belongs to us. It's the people of the state.
relates back to the legal status. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that I had mentioned in my video, it's game time, is that the public agents quite often are just running roughshod over people regardless of any rights or limitations on their activities. And we need to have some level of not only authority, but firepower to fire back at these people that create damages and put them back in their place so that we can instill a certain level of fear. You know, I forget who said it, but, you know, a government who fears, what is it? The government that fears the people is far different than the people who fear the government. That's not correct, but you get the idea.
I believe it's something to the effect that when the people fear the government, you have tyranny.
There you go.
Yes. But when the government fears the people, you have liberty.
Yeah.
I definitely understand that. And actually, the problem was addressed in 1866. It was already done for us, and we just simply didn't know. It was addressed in a U.S. Supreme Court case called Milligan, or rather Ex parte Milligan, and that's M-I-L-L-I-G-A-N, Milligan, the Irish name.
Mm-hmm.
And Ex parte Milligan is 71 U.S. 2 when you go to look it up. And basically what it says is, okay, we've got this chaotic situation. We have to have military courts come in to create order out of chaos in the South in the wake of the Civil War. Therefore, we have to have some provision for the return of normalcy. What they did is they went through the South and created 10 military districts throughout the South at the end of the Civil War. And each one of those districts had a new court system, a quasi-military court system, where brigadier level generals were appointed to go in and set up courts. And these were the famous carpetbagger courts, where all the guys came down from the North, set up courts in the South, and fleeced what was left out of the South. And this was all done under the auspices of the United States Army at that point. Anyway, so this was immediately challenged and brought to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court in Ex parte Milligan said that when the civilian courts arise, the military courts have to disappear. They have to stand down and go back to their normal business. And so what started out in the South gradually usurped upon and spread to the North as civilian courts shut down. And now it's up to us to rebuild, restore, and populate our civilian courts, which we do through our state assemblies. When someone comes into a state assembly and accepts the responsibility of self-governance and joins as a state citizen, they agree to be a juror. Okay, so you fill your jury pools. They also become an elector, so that they can elect their county sheriffs, they can elect their justices of the peace, they can elect their bail bondsman, their coroner, and everybody else that is needed to enforce the public law, because we've been living under private law, corporate law, for 150 years.
So you're saying the military courts have really never stood down?
They've never stood down.
Which explains the military flag in all the courtrooms.
Yeah, yes, it does. And it also explains the injustices that have been promulgated against the American people, because these are private courts. These are king's courts, queen's courts, and they are corporate tribunals. They are not civilian courts that address actual people. They are not being run under American common law, and they're not being run according to the public law. They're being run according to the public policies of corporations that are in the business of providing governmental services. And they are operating in this quasi-fraudulent manner in order to retain control of the population. But in doing that, they are actually violating the law. So you've got this bizarre situation where the courts are acting in a criminal fashion. And the only way that we can actually address that and change that is by joining the state assembly, setting up our own courts, electing our own peacekeeping officials and officers, and dealing with it. We have to bring forward the civilian courts in order to make the military and the commercial courts stand down.
Mm-hmm. I was very active in that back in the 90s. In fact, we held a common law, a people's court, one Supreme Court of the county, in the city council chambers in Dacono, a small town north of Denver. In fact, we had some of our persecutors from the multi-jurisdictional task force, local county prosecutors. We actually asked the sheriff's department to provide a deputy for security. And it was quite a big deal. And I'll never forget, we did some quiet title actions. People were doing a quiet title over their person as a means of, declaring status and reclaiming control over themselves. And I recall hearing one of the county prosecutors from that county, I think it was Weld or Greeley County up there, say something to the effect that, these people really know what they're doing. They're doing a good job. I think if I ever had an issue, I'd like to come here to this court.
Well, yeah, our courts are designed for people. Our courts are real. And their courts are all about corporations and corporate officials.
Yeah, and monopolies and exclusion.
Right.
Yeah.
And basically pillaging the public trust. That's what they do best. But we can put an end to that simply by organizing ourselves, declaring our political status, joining our state assembly as state citizens, setting up our own courts, electing our own sheriffs, assembly sheriffs that are in a different political status and capacity than the law enforcement sheriffs that everybody sees in the incorporated counties. And our sheriffs overstand their sheriffs. A few of our assemblies are at the point where they have set up their courts and filled their jury pools and elected their sheriffs. And we find that in those cases where we've done our job and we're set up to properly self-govern, our sheriff goes in and talks to their sheriff, and we get what we want.
Yeah, you mentioned you've had several prisoners released on that basis, right?
We've had our prisons released, people that have been picked up for infractions that they're really not obligated to observe. We've been able to go in under a 72-hour order. We found out that that's the historical agreement, that when one of our people gets picked up by one of their law enforcement officers, they have 72 hours to return them. And so we send the assembly sheriff in with a 72-hour release letter, basically saying, hey, that's one of our people. They're not standing under your law. Yeah. I'm here to receive custody. And so that way we're able to get people out of jail who shouldn't be there. We're able to negotiate with the other service provider, in this case, the state of state LEOs, and we're able to do things like get children back to their parents who've been seized under false presumptions by CPS.
Praise God for that.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of things that you can do once you're organized to do them. And as it turns out, we can make these foreign courts, I call them foreign even though they're staffed by Americans, we can make these foreign courts stand down, and we can address our issues as living people, and we can protect our living people And that's all already set up. That's already agreed upon. That's all within our agreements with the other principles involved. So,
Go ahead.
well, I'm just saying that people wonder why they can't get their constitutional guarantees. You know, my right to keep and bear arms, my right to free speech, all of these things that everyone holds sacred and assumes that they have, you have to come forward and claim those by claiming your American political status. Otherwise, you're not a party to that agreement and you don't have any protection under it.
Yeah. Now, I can imagine that, in the early days where many states are getting organized, that there'll be some pushback from the corporate authorities not wanting to recognize. And I can only say to that is why it is so important that everybody watching this presentation, this discussion, get involved in their state assembly. We need people. We need to reclaim our territory. We need the couch potatoes to get off the couch and get active, get involved, and learn these things. So that'll carry some weight, because I remember when we did our court back in the 90s, we sent a letter rogatory, which is a letter from one court to another court. In my case specifically, I was at the time being persecuted, and of course, they ignored it and just kind of laughed it off, like, well, who are these people? They think they're, impersonating government officials. Has that ever come up? Accusations of impersonating public officials or anything along those lines? Because that can be a weapon they can use.
Well, that's ironic, since they're the ones impersonating public officials. They're all private officials.
Yeah.
They're all working for foreign governments and for corporations. So they really, that is an example of the pot calling the kettle black, for sure.
Yeah.
We actually haven't had any problems with that, because we know too well and have established the facts too explicitly for there to be that kind of presumption or accusation made. There have been some people who have misunderstood how this system works, people who are only familiar with what is and not with what should be and what can be, who have, for example, assumed that all lawyers have to be members of the Bar Association. They don't realize that a bar association is like a labor union for lawyers. It is a specialty organization for people who practice admiralty law and for people that are in commerce, who do contract law for commercial organizations. It has nothing to do with law in the public sense. It has nothing to do with the kind of law that we as people are owed, okay? Mm-hmm. So our courts, not only do we not have bar association requirements, bar association membership in our courts is actually prohibited. You cannot be a bar attorney and have a position in our people's court.
Yeah.
No.
Absolutely. Just for example, I remember hearing of a case, again, back in the 90s, I studied with Dan Peterson, Leroy Schweitzer, and some of those Montana boys. And they had people all over the country going into old bookstores and digging out old law books. And one thing that struck me was an actual case they found of a lady in, I think it was Larimer County, Colorado. She went away for a while. Her house was empty. She came back. There was a squatter in her house, and he wouldn't leave. And so she organized her own court. She went, got the sheriff, said, "Sheriff, I want to hold court in this place at this time next week." She went and got a jury of her peers assembled and basically set her own court, brought everybody together. The sheriff showed up to keep the peace. They held court, and the squatter was found guilty and physically removed. Now that's how the people govern themselves.
We held court against the IRS in the lobby of their building. They had an office where they were renting space. So we simply held court in the lobby of the building where their offices were located, and invited them to attend and gave them notice that the case would be tried. And they came to observe, but they didn't participate in giving any kind of rebuttal to the charges or anything. They just kind of sat there silent throughout the entire thing. And we videotaped it. There has never been a rebuttal or any kind of argument from the IRS about anything that we did.
And when you know what you're doing, they can't really rebut much of anything. It gets to be a lot of fun once you know the ropes a little bit. So back to redress of grievances and seeking damages. You know, so many people have been damaged just terribly, thrown in jail unlawfully, denied medical assistance, property stolen, families separated. I mean, the lists go on and on and on. What would a person do who feels that they are owed damages to try and get some remedy? Is that something that could be done using their admiralty courts, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the best thing, of course, is always prevention. You know, stop the problem where it starts first and foremost, because after it's already happened, then you're doing a recoupment action, and those are always messier than if you can just stop it at the beginning.
Yeah.
And the way to stop it at the beginning is, number one, to declare your proper political status and record it so that is on the record and it's court admissible evidence in your favor, okay, that you're an American and not a U.S. citizen and not involved in their petty mercenary war that they've continued. And then you take your exemptions. There are two courts that we could be facing, and typically what in the past we've been doing is that we're facing the municipal court first. That's the all capital letters court, right? Okay. So they bring us in because the municipal government has been exercising all the service contracts. They have the legal titles, okay? So they bring you into one of these all capital letter municipal courts, and they are charging municipal defendants that are all in capital letters too. Okay, so you go in there and you say, I claim my exemption as an American under Title 15, Section 7, C and E, 2012. Okay, I'm exempt from municipal court. What have you got my name on your docket for? Okay, so that goes away. Next, they bring in the territorial court. Now, this is the Queen or the King's court, depending on what the situation is. But anyway, it's a British court, and they're functioning under military law, military common law. So then you turn to them and you say, well, I declare my foreign sovereign immunity under the Foreign Sovereign Immunity Act. I'm an American. What are you addressing me for? Do you have cause to think that I was involved in interstate manufacture, sale, or transportation of alcohol, tobacco, or firearms?
Yeah, of course not. No.
So if it's something big, I mean, if you're accused of murdering someone, obviously it's going to be an issue. But then you move to a constitutional court, and they're all required to provide a constitutional court if they're going to continue to do business. So they have a choice between providing you with a constitutional court, which is damned hard for them to do, or they have to dismiss the case.
Okay, so that's being named as a defendant and how to deal with that accordingly. Up front,
yes. Yeah. So you don't have a problem.
Yeah, no, that's always the best. In fact, I founded the World Mission Church. Our whole theme is to come out of Babylon and just walk away. A lot of folks are saying, you know, I want to go back, collect all my back taxes that I paid to the IRS. I say, just forget it. Just walk away. The best thing you can do is turn your back, walk away, and never look back.
I think I have some good news for you.
Okay, good.
When you're faced with a situation like that, or like this that we're in, where literally millions of people for generations have been genocided on paper and their property assets have been taken title to and placed in a public charitable trust, the amount of restoration and debt involved is mind-boggling. Because, Mark, you're not just looking at your losses, you're looking at your parents' losses, you're looking at your grandparents, and in many cases, your great-great and great-great-grandparents, okay? And this is all owed back to you by the perpetrators, plus interest. So think about that for a moment. These runaway, run amok federal employees who have been misdirected deliberately by the Roman pontiff and by the Queen or kings, the British monarchs who have been acting as overseers of the Commonwealth interests in this country, have purloined hundreds of trillions of dollars, if not quadrillions of dollars, from each generation of Americans. And they've done this by seizing upon our labor, by using our people as cannon fodder. They've done it through improper mortgage practices, improper taxation, you name it, they've done it. So what's going to happen in the next few weeks is that the municipal government bankruptcy is going to settle. When that settles, all the legal titles being held by the municipal government will then return to the equitable title holder, the territorial government, and the trust will collapse. You know, you bring together the legal title and the equitable title, and the trust collapses.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so what happens then? Well, the beneficiaries of that trust receive the proceeds. And that happens to be us.
Yeah.
And thankfully, we were able to get all of our liens in place well in advance of all of this happening, so that every state has its own claim to the assets of that state.
That's huge. So how does that get distributed, or does it?
Well, there'll be a lot of ways to distribute it. What we suggested in terms of getting back like say, for example, IRS taxation, you were forced to pay into a program that you didn't volunteer to pay into, and were basically extorted and racketeered into identifying yourself as a taxpayer in ignorance without disclosure, all of that. So how do you get your money back? Well, obviously, if they had to pay us all back and a lump sum with interest, they couldn't possibly do it. It would collapse all efforts at their government or any other government. So what happens is that you get basically a special purpose credit card. And that credit card settles the books between what you may owe them for services and what they already owe you. So it's like a prepaid credit card.
Uh-huh.
For all of the things, for all taxes, for all the things that come to you in your all capital letters name, regardless of what that billing is. For example, you might have a car loan. You might have a university bill. You might have utility bills. All these different kinds of bills that come to you in the all capital letters name would be settled out using this card. Mm-hmm. And for most people, that means mortgages, car loans, education loans, anything like that can be paid off using this card. So it's It's like a prepaid credit card. You already have the credit established.
Yeah.
And now you have access to it.
Okay.
Okay.
So it sounds very similar to this black credit card that people who are sharp enough to get access to their accounts in the U.S. Treasury, who are very few, people have heard about that in the past. Sounds similar to that.
It's not a charge anything you want card, but it's a charge so that you don't get billed for things that you shouldn't be billed for.
Yeah.
It gives you access to your own credit, which is what's been lacking all this time. And the excuse for that has been that you were unidentified. You might be an enemy. They've had this bogus quote unquote war going on our shores for 150 years. And both sides claim you're the enemy, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, they did that when they adjusted I think it was the Agricultural Act of 1938, wasn't it? The Trading with the Enemies Act. Yeah, in the Agricultural Act of 1938, they adjusted the definitions of the Trading with the Enemies Act, where they then defined people as the enemy. The people are the enemy. So that's in the books.
Yeah, well, except that once again, they're throwing the responsibility back on us. They have to. Otherwise, what they're doing would be illegal and unlawful, and it would be against both the Hague Convention and the Geneva Convention, which they are respectively responsible for adhering to. So it's up to us to raise our hand and say, hey, I'm not one of you, and I'm not one of you. I'm a third party. I'm out of this. This is not my war. You guys are mercenaries here fighting each other on my shores. Leave me the hell out of it.
Yeah.
And, that's where the Declaration comes in, and recording your political status as an American instead of letting them define you as any kind of U.S. citizen. People have a real problem because all they've heard all their lives is U.S. citizen this and U.S. citizen that. And they've certainly seen that question asked on a multitude of different kinds of forms. And when it's asked you on all of these forms, they're never explicit about what kind of U.S. citizen you might be.
Right.
Of course, we always think of the United States, right? And we think, well, sure, we're citizens of the United States, but then it gets down to this little parley about, is it these United States or those United States? It's a legalese trap.
Yeah,
right? Yeah, what kind of United States citizen are you talking about, right? But people just check the box, and then that leaves it up to them to decide what kind of citizen you are and which United States you belong to. You've got multiple choices here, but only one box. And so that's where they trap people. You are a citizen of the United States with a capital T, but you're not the citizen of the small THE version of United States.
Yeah, it's a little bit mind-bending for people that are not familiar with legalese. Definitions, what it comes down to. So, okay, so the black debit card enables you to offset bills you might receive, accessing your credit. You've talked in the past about an indemnity fund. Are those two different things?
Well, indemnity is private side insurance. And it started out with, all of this scam started out in the 1720s with bottomry bond scandals and frauds, where they were creating vessels, ships, naming ships that don't exist after people, and taking out bottomry bonds on them.
Oh boy.
So it was an early form of life insurance fraud. When you died, your ship was lost, right? And whoever happened to be holding the bottomry bond insurance then could collect, in effect, life insurance on you. And this same fraud has continued on from the 1720s with the shipping industry all the way through to today, when what they do is they claim that they are making up all these special purpose vehicles.
Right.
So it just switched from ships to land vehicles. And it's the same scam. It's the same thing throughout, from 1720 to, we've had 300 years, and we still can't get rid of this one pernicious fraud.
Yeah.
But anyway, I kind of got sidetracked there. But now that we have a 2020 vision and all the history of it worked out, we can smash it. And the people can get restitution. And I think the restitution for most people will be such a relief. And the effect of it, because you see that in the process of doing this, they have created these unimaginably large slush funds that they have been using and controlling for us, right?
Uh-huh.
Well, now all those slush funds come back into play for us, literally. So, for example, there will never again be any need for property taxes. There will never again be any need for any kind of municipal tax. Not all kinds of no IRS, nothing like that will be necessary ever again, because the income being generated off those slush funds is such that it would completely pay for every kind of governmental service we could ever imagine, including things that we don't have now.
Okay, so these assets then you referred to as an indemnity fund basically could be tapped into to create certain instruments or private instruments that would in effect replace insurance. Is that right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, indemnity, if you're standing in your sovereign status as a state citizen, you own it all. Yeah, you absolutely own it all. So why would you charge yourself?
Yeah.
It's crazy. So the income that's coming off of all those slush funds will more than pay for any kind of governmental service that any of us will ever want, plus more. We've had a situation where our veterans have been standing on street corners with these pathetic little, help signs, and, panhandling. We've had people who are suffering from drug addiction and alcohol going without proper care. We've had every kind of scam against our homes and our land that can be imagined. Every kind of mortgage scandal and fraud that has ever hit the books has hit our shores. There's everything that you can think of that's wrong. We don't even have hospices in this country. Those that exist are largely just private efforts on the part of churches and other do-gooders. It's not anything that the public has supported. But anyway,
Okay.
the amount of money there is such that we're never going to have to deal with taxes again.
Won't that be a relief? Yeah, there's so much out there, and I was introduced years ago to the combined annual financial reports, all the off the books assets that the governments have. They don't need to collect taxes now for anything. People say, well, how would they repair the streets and pay for the schools? They've already got all the money in the world with these CAFRs, combined annual financial reports, and those are the assets that you're referring to, off the books.
Oh, well, there's more than that. I mean, there's huge slush funds everywhere you look.
Yeah.
And once you start really looking at it in terms of a forensic audit of any of these governmental services corporation holdings that they're holding, quote unquote, for us and managing for us, it's absolutely staggering how much we have in assets and how much is owed to us. So that there's really no reason that we would ever have to have any form of taxation ever again, anywhere. For government services.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, that leads us to the banking situation. You've been looking into state chartered credit unions, and we talked previously about a transfer system that would not require the need of the SWIFT or the ABA routing numbers. Tell us a little bit about that. Where are you at there on the banking?
Well, the credit unions technically belong to the United States of America. And I mean with a capital T, meaning our Federation of States, okay? So the credit unions can be brought forward as the state assembly credit unions, and the membership can include all state nationals and all state citizens. So we have our own non-federal state chartered credit unions, right?
Okay.
And those credit unions are competent to do things that people need to have done. These credit unions can do your checking, your savings, loans that you might want for your business, and can do it honestly for a small fee.
Mm-hmm.
So the bulk of all of the day-to-day transactions that families need can be handled through our state assemblies, through our state credit unions, okay? And we can have our own system, our own interbank or inter-institution transfer system to do all of the checking and routing and blah, 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 okay? The missing piece is the Mercantile Bank, and that is for larger businesses. You know, for me, just conducting my day-to-day grocery shopping, I don't need the capability of putting, $10 million chunks of money into building my business, but there are needs like that too. And so we have to have a mercantile bank system backing up the credit unions for larger scale business operations. And we can do that because at the end of the day, lawful assets can only belong to lawful persons. Once the trust collapses, and it will, the lawful persons inherit the actual physical assets.
Okay.
So we inherit the land, we inherit the gold, all the things that are tangible are ours.
So
They do not.
lawful assets are one thing. What would the currency be?
Well,
the exchange.
Well, the currency can then be, it can be defined as a range of different currencies that are all asset backed.
Okay.
So, for example, our US silver dollars are still lawful currency for this country.
Uh-huh.
And when things are adjusted out, each one of those silver dollars is pegged against about $40,000 of US debt.
Wow.
We can issue silver certificates. We can issue gold certificates.
Okay, so as they did in the old days.
Yeah. And
certificates against the assets.
Right. There are all sorts of different ways of redoing a transitional system based on actual commodity assets.
Yeah.
And everybody's comfortable with that concept, even though it's loopy in itself. What we additionally would like to do is set up what I call a universal currency, because in the future, this is what's going to make sense. Because, chasing around after bushels of wheat or gallons of oil or ounces of gold it's so stupid. But it really is a very primitive and baseless system to build your economy upon. What should happen if you're going to use any kind of a system like that for money is that all labor resources and all commodities that are traded should have an established value. And then you should have a currency that is based on that value, the totality of everything that's traded, okay? And that way, there's a natural buffer. you don't have hoarding. There's no particular benefit in hoarding gold or hoarding wheat or whatever else it is that you're going to hoard as a commodity. There's no benefit in driving down the price of labor. The only benefit that you can get when you have that kind of currency is if you improve things. So if you improve your labor force by making it more efficient or better educated or better motivated, then the value of the currency increases. Mm-hmm. If you improve the value of your natural resources by replanting trees, by cleaning up your water, by doing these other things that make your resources more valuable, then currency increases. It becomes a cooperative worldwide effort to increase the overall value, beauty, health, and well-being of the planet.
Yeah, it's all added value.
So that is ultimately where we're going, is a currency that you can then also invest in, just as you invest in, how currency speculation works. You can invest in a foreign currency if you think it's going to go up relative to other currencies, right? Right. Well, the advantage of the universal currency that we're looking at would be that it would act as a buffer to all losses. Okay. Right? Yeah. Sort of like the commodity market, where if you're a producer, you have an edge and you can sell futures. Well, in this case, everybody's a producer with respect to the universal currency, right?
Okay.
So everybody has that advantage. And whether your strength is in numbers, like in China, where they have a vast population of workers, or if your advantage is natural resources, like in the United States, it's all on the books, so to speak, and it's all production. It's all included, so that everybody has a hand to play and something to play with, as opposed to the current situation where the bankers in London control the LIBOR and all the rest of it, and can play the precious metals market however they see fit.
Yeah, it's all controlled for sure. I've been quite active in those markets, and it's amazing what goes on. A lot of stories to tell, but I won't get into that now. So, okay, well, that's quite a bit to chew on. One last thing that most people can relate to is the idea of traveling in a private conveyance, which is a non-commercial vehicle. And in previous conversation, you mentioned that Alaska has these Z tags, right? The private vehicles, and I know California is issuing private conveyance tags to use that are non-commercial. So this is something that's starting to take hold.
Right. Well, it has to, because that's the law.
Yeah.
They've been racketeering for years and just haven't been called on it. They haven't been obeying their own regulations. So what we're doing is we're going to issue private plates for all the state assemblies, and you'll have what looks like a license plate, but isn't a license plate. It's a private property plate that identifies this car as being your private property.
No.
Yes, imagine it. And it doesn't, it doesn't really matter whether they're holding the manufacturer's statement of origin or not, because we own them. I mean, it all just trickles downhill. Once you assume your proper place in the hierarchy of things, then you own it all.
Yeah. You assume the throne.
Well, and it's really pretty simple once you get that firmly in mind that, hey, I'm an American, I'm not a U.S. citizen, I don't work for the federal government, I'm not dependent on anybody who works for the federal government either. I'm not seeking political asylum in the U.S. Let's see, what else could I be? Oh, I'm an American.
Well, there's obviously quite a bit to dig into, and it's a whole new modus operandi, I'm sure, for most people. And needless to say, there's a lot of work to be done in all of these areas, a lot of work to be done. So this needs to be a collective effort. And I would put out an appeal to all other groups and organizations that are in the same mindset that we are and fighting for freedom, that we need to put aside, pride and ego and, turf building based on your own moniker. We need to come together and really have a groundswell of support along these lines. There's always going to be differences of opinion on how to do this or how to do that. But that's just the way the world has always been and always will be. So we need to get over that. And I think we really need to encourage not only all Americans, but people worldwide to come together in this effort, because we're under a full court press right now to steal our freedoms. And if we don't stand up and claim those right now, then I'm afraid we're gonna lose them permanently. And so just a little bit about the Lighthouse Law Club. In view of the necessity for the educational aspects of this coming out, we've opened the doors to the Lighthouse Law Club to collaborate in this effort, to support yourself, Anna, the state assemblies, everybody involved in that. We'll do everything we possibly can to build the ranks and fulfill the role of providing education in those areas. As for funding, you've talked a lot about that. We've got our own little answer to that. We've got a very simple little a gifting program we call the Community Support Network, and all we ask in exchange for a free membership for the Lighthouse Law Club is for people to participate in the Community Support Network. And this is going to help people create some economic independence. I won't go into the details, but those can be had. And I've also created the World Mission Church for those that have a biblical mindset. And the whole idea there is to really come out of Babylon. And I can see that the state assemblies and what you're doing there is going to help us to do just that, to come out of Babylon, to get out of the Babylonian system. And the World Mission Church is really taking this on, at the spiritual level, as well as the practical level in different ways. So those are two different organizations that I'm involved in that will come together to help the state assemblies and contribute and collaborate in any way that we can. And I feel that the Lighthouse and the World Mission Church can augment some of the services, the educational, the opportunities that are there, so that we can, together we can be better than we were individually. And I'd like to see the same thing from other groups and organizations doing the same thing. There's groups out there that are doing great things. There's people that have great experience, knowledge, resources that can contribute to this effort, and we just need to come together. And so I invite everybody else out there in the freedom movement to join us in one way, shape, or form. Let's get on the bandwagon. And that was really my whole intent. I did the video, It's Game Time, and you responded to that, Anna. And I think, I think that really boils it down for everybody. We need organization, we need education, and we need funding. And we're working on all three of those aspects from my end. You are with the state assemblies, and together we're going to do great things. There's no doubt about that. And I invite others to join us. So, Anna, any final words you'd like to leave people with?
Well, I first of all, I really want to thank you, Mark, because, oftentimes we get lost in the bushes, especially when it comes to all the legalese and all the legal matters and historical research. And, we get into details and we lose sight of the basic issues, and somehow your little video, It's Game Time, really spoke to me. It was so clear. It was clarion call. It was a less than a 2-minute synopsis of our problem. and I thought, he's right. He is 100% right. And, I've talked it up with the living law firm staff, and they're gung-ho to join forces with the Lighthouse Law Club. And I've talked it up with the Constitutional Law Group, and they're, all for it. And I think that, the World Mission Church is a wonderful concept for many of us who have lost our affiliation with the incorporated churches. I can speak for myself that I just recently officially sent a severance letter to the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, the church I grew up in, and basically told them to strike my name from the baptismal and confirmation and every other kind of record they had on me, because they incorporated, and it was never my intention to be part of a corporation, to be enfranchised by an organization calling itself a church. Basically what really offended me was the discovery that these churches, these incorporated churches, are selling baptismal certificates on the black market, the same way that other entities have sold birth certificates, and created an exchange for souls.
Amazing.
They even, the commercial taint has reached to that level where they're claiming to own souls and to beg, barter, and steal souls on exchanges, secret exchanges.
So the church is making merchandise of souls.
Yes.
Wow, what an abomination. It
couldn't get any worse. And so, I have left the Evangelical Lutheran Church because of this. And I would encourage anybody else who's part of an incorporated church to leave for the same reason. The offensiveness of this against God and man cannot even be estimated. And so World Mission Church is unincorporated. It's an assembly of believers and followers in the teachings that our Bible has provided. And I think it's an excellent choice for people like me who have, looked at the situation with the incorporated churches and said, no, I don't want to be part of that. I do want a community of believers. I do want to join with others who have, similar values, but I do not want to be involved in any kind of commercial church, because by definition, a commercial church is not a church. And so I'm looking forward to joining the World Mission Church, which is not incorporated. And I'm looking forward to joining the CSN program and helping to do my bit to fund and assist others.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. And again, together we can do more than we can do on our own. So I'm very thrilled to be in league with you, Anna, and your team, and all of the folks involved with the state assemblies. And I know together we're going to do great things. And let's get this snowball rolling with other organizations and take back our land, our territory, our government, our freedom. So
yes.
With that, thank you, Anna. I appreciate your time and all you do. God bless you, and look forward to great things ahead.
Take care, Mark. Thank you.
All right.